Welcome to Division Street, a mini-series on YourTV that seeks to help us understand why our city is facing certain challenges like unaffordable housing, food insecurity, and the drug poisoning crisis, and what people are doing about it. I'm Sayyida Jaffer, co-host of Division Street with Jamie Swift. Today we welcome Justine McIsaac. She's the Consumption and Treatment Services Coordinator at the Integrated Care Hub. Justine has been working with people who use substances for many years, and she's going to help us shed some light onto the current crisis that we're seeing in Kingston. Thanks so much for joining us today, Justine. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Well, we really appreciate you being with us. Before we kind of get into the interview, I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you came to getting involved with working with people who use substances.
Well, I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with people that use substances for almost 15 years now. And the reason I choose to work with people that use substances is because I'm a person with lived experience. I saw the great need in our community. I saw the immense amount of stigma that people were facing, and I felt that I had a voice that needed to be used in order to support people. So I continue to do that day in and day out.
Thank you and so I know before working at the Integrated Care Hub, you also spent time working at Street Health. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I spent the first decade or so of my career at Street Health as the hepatitis C outreach worker. And that's really kind of where I started to formulate my relationships with people who are unhoused in the community and were using substances, and I saw how great the need was. And then when the drug poisoning crisis hit, it started to take even a deadlier turn, and I saw people languishing and dying at rates that I'd never seen before. So I was fortunate enough to go work for Toronto Public Health for a period of time, helped open up the second approved safe injection site in North America, and was able to bring that experience back here and apply it to the community and for people that particularly that use substances.
We're lucky to have you here
Thank
in Kingston.
You.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about language. And so when talking about people who use substances, we sometimes hear terms like addict, addiction, or substance use disorder. What are your preferred terms, and can you tell us why?
Well, most of all, I like to refer to people by their name and who they are, and get to know that individual as a person. I think when we use harmful terms like addict or junkie or things like that, we're defining a person by their substance use, as that's all they are, right? Not knowing that there's a great backstory behind a lot of the struggles that this individual has. And I think if people understood the pain and the trauma that people carry, I think they'd actually have different terminology for people as well too. Somebody that's unwell, somebody that's sick, somebody that's experienced an immense amount of pain. I think we would change our terminology altogether, but those are harmful words that perpetuate stigma and discrimination towards an already very vulnerable population.
Thank you for that. So could you also talk a bit about the term harm reduction? Because we hear that a lot when it comes to thinking about services that relate to people who use substances.
Yeah, so the whole concept of harm reduction is principles and philosophies that reduce the harm of any type of risky behavior. So in my setting, harm reduction philosophies and policies and things like that apply specifically to people that use substances, right? So if somebody's injecting substances, the safest way to do that is to ensure that they have all the clean supplies they need in order to inject, so that they don't contract things like hepatitis C, HIV, anything that would be a consequence to their substance use, which in long term is a benefit to the community as well too. It costs pennies to prevent somebody from contracting hepatitis C, but it actually costs close to $100,000 to treat hepatitis C, right? So if we give people the education and the tools they need, it will reduce the harms of their substance use. But we apply harm reduction practices in our daily lives all the time. You know, I talk about this with young people who are learning about harm reduction, like putting on your seatbelt is a form of harm reduction. When you go into a bar and they don't serve somebody because they've had too much alcohol, that's harm reduction, right? If you wear a helmet while you're biking, that is harm reduction. Eating at the right time, taking care of yourself, those are all different forms of harm reduction, right? When I talk about harm reduction, it's in regards to people that use substances, right? So providing safe consumption sites, right? We know that people are using a toxic drug supply. They don't want to die. So why wouldn't we provide them a space where we can then monitor that person to ensure that they don't die just trying to feel well? And in turn, it saves our healthcare system millions of dollars a year. It's ER diversion, and it's actually supporting people and building relationships with them so we can support them however their future looks moving forward.
So you said a lot in there, and I wonder if we can unpack a few of those pieces. Maybe first you could talk a bit about the Integrated Care Hub and the kinds of services you offer there, and how that plays into what you just described in terms of supporting people and their needs.
Well, the Integrated Care Hub, I feel like, is a really special, unique place, kind of a diamond in the rough in this community, as it's the first shelter drop-in consumption site, low barrier service that this community has ever had. And that comes with its challenges in the sense that we have turned a blind eye to substance use for many years. We have kind of shied away from it, hidden from it. And here there's actual, like, visible substance use. And people are quite shocked by that because they've never seen it before. And I think what's important to understand is that there's a difference between safety and being uncomfortable. And talking about substance use and seeing substance use can be an uncomfortable thing. But I never question my safety in the space. I never question my coworkers' safety. It's actually the place that I feel the most safest living in this community. But the ICH was birthed out of the voices of the people that were living in Bell Park at the time. Obviously, it became a very political hot topic. It was the first time visible homelessness was in people's faces in the community. That made people very uncomfortable. And I think what came down to it is we had to politically appease both sides. We had a population of people that had nowhere to go, and a community that was saying, what are you doing with these people? So myself and my co-workers from Trellis, we started to spend a lot of time down at Bell Park and speaking with people and finding out what they needed and their struggles. And we opened up the Integrated Care Hub to support a specific group of individuals that use substances that have not been able to access the shelter system. For many, many years, it was not conducive to them using substances, that have been turned away from many drop-ins and meal programs because they may present in a way that people don't understand. So we opened our doors saying, come as you are, you're welcome, and we will support you through this journey.
And how has that gone? It's my understanding that the Integrated Care Hub is almost always, if not always, at capacity or full. And so that to me signals that there is clearly, it's meeting a need, and it's a place that people choose to be over other places. And what's it like to navigate space with so many people using your services?
Yeah, like that can be challenging. I'd say all the time, like I feel like we actually live in the space with people. We all spend so much time there, and communal living is very challenging for people. For those that have never experienced communal living, I dare you to try it. It's really hard on people's mental capacity and their wellness and things like that, which is why people have chose to camp within the vicinity of the Integrated Care Hub or other parts of the city, because they're just looking for personal autonomy. It's really hard to live in communal living. But I think that what makes us unique is that we've been able to keep people with us for long periods of time that have not been able to stay in the shelter system, or have not been able to keep housing, or were incarcerated over and over again. And it's just based off of the way we treat them. We have open, meaningful relationships with them. They don't have to hide who they are. They don't have to be ashamed of their substance use. They don't have to be ashamed of their story, period, and how they end up unhoused and all these types of things. And people that have been mistreated for so long, of course they're going to flock to somewhere that accepts them and treats them well. But yeah, we've been at capacity since the day we opened in 2020. So it shows the increasing need for appropriate housing in our community, specifically for people that use substances. Because we're living in a drug poisoning crisis, it's really important to ensure that we have appropriate, safe housing for them. And it does not exist in this community right now. So we feel the need to keep people as close as possible and as safe as possible until we can come up with the right solution.
I want to talk a bit more about housing in a little bit, though I wonder if you could tell us more about what the drug poisoning crisis is looking like. I think many people in Kingston have heard that people are dying, and it's typically reported as people are dying of an overdose or that kind of thing. How serious is this, and how is this kind of faring relative to other parts of Canada?
It's the most serious thing I've ever experienced in my life. I think if you had have asked me 10 years ago if I thought my career would take such a drastic turn in the way that it has, I wouldn't have believed you whatsoever. It is the realest thing that is going on in our community. More people have died of an opiate overdose than COVID in this province. Last year we had one of the deadliest years due to drug poisoning deaths. The average.
What does drug poisoning mean?
That's a good question, right? So typically, when we talk about somebody that has died of an overdose means that somebody took too much of something and it overloaded their system. When we talk about drug poisoning, it's not that people are taking too much, it's the inconsistency of it. So they're literally being poisoned to death. So they could use a very, very small amount and still die off of it, right? Because the supply itself is so toxic. It's not prescription grade, it's bootleg, it's inconsistent, and it's poisonous.
Thank you for explaining that. So you were talking a bit about the current crisis that we're in and its severity.
Yeah, so in Ontario alone, on average, about 8 young people are dying of an opiate overdose or a toxic drug supply overdose every single day.
Wow.
The average person that is dying of a drug poisoning in this province is between the ages of 15 and 44. And it's not getting any better. And I will tell you it's not getting any better because we haven't changed the social construct of how we view individuals that use substances. We have this concept that if they choose to use drugs and they die, that was their choice. Not understanding that there's so many more complex issues surrounding that. And we're treating it as a moral failure of that person when actually it's a community-based health crisis that we're all responsible for contributing and taking care of. And because we haven't, as a community, rallied around individuals because of the social construct of how we view them, we've been allowing people to die in ways that I never thought we would, and at rates that I never thought we would. And it's probably one of the most devastating health crises we've ever experienced in this country, and we've virtually done nothing about it.
So, given that so many people are dying from the drug poisoning crisis in Kingston, and thanks for explaining what drug poisoning means in this context, what do you think could be preventing these particular deaths, and what could we be doing at a local or provincial or national level? Mm-hmm.
From a federal level, we could decriminalize all illicit substances, take the power and control out of the black market, and pair it with safe supply. Now, when I talk about safe supply, what I mean is giving people the option to use prescription-grade opiates that are controlled over using an illicit black market. And when people were using prescription-grade opiates before, we did not see the deaths that we're seeing now. So giving people other options as well too. That would have to be done on a federal level for it really to be impactful. On a provincial level, we could...
Can we go back to the federal for a second? Because I understand that in British Columbia, they have received some type of exemption or permission to do this, though I have heard that there have been critiques about how it's been done. And do you have thoughts on the British Columbia approach and what's been approved?
Yeah, like I'm always super proud of that province. Obviously, they've always been far more progressive instead of regressive. in some sense, they're doing us a favor by doing it first. We can learn from that for sure. But it doesn't help Ontario right now. It doesn't help Alberta right now. It doesn't help Nova Scotia right now in those aspects. And Ontario actually posted some of the highest deaths per province last year. So I feel like we need to be pushing harder and faster to decriminalize federally.
How might it help people who use substances if decriminalization happened?
Well, there's a variety of things. We've been criminalizing people for a long time who are actually sick and putting them in institutions, which we know causes far more trauma. The average person can become institutionalized within a 15-day period. It costs us thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to incarcerate people on simple possession. And what that could do for people in the long run is it frees up an immense amount of resources that could be put back into the community and back into these individuals particularly, and help them rebuild and reconnect them to society, right? Build off the strengths that they already have, show them acceptance, and also what it does as a community is it creates happier, healthier connections. You have less petty crime, you have less deaths in your community, you have people that can maintain housing, you have people that actually decrease their substance use when they feel connected, feel supported, and have the appropriate housing. It could impact them in many, many different ways. And then Safe Supply, what Safe Supply would do is just eliminate the criminal behavior that comes with substance use altogether. People wouldn't have to commit petty thefts in order to obtain a substance to feel well. It would be provided for them, right? So it would change people's lives. It would save people's lives, and it would have saved 40,000 plus lives prior if we had acted sooner.
That's a sobering number.
Yeah.
When you talk about safe or safer supply, could you help us understand what that could look like in the community? What would a safe supply program, or like what would that look like? How would it operate?
Well, it would operate with that individual having, a very strong, open, honest relationship with their prescribing physician, which I think in healthcare, substance use has been so kind of hidden and discriminated against that people have not had open relationships with their physicians for fear of being discriminated against, stigmatized, cut off from any previous prescriptions and things like that.
What does that stigma look like?
Oh, it's pretty awful, actually. Places like Street Health and the Integrated Care Hub exist because people that use substances have not been able to access mainstream healthcare services for many years. And what that stigma looks like is soul crushing. It takes a little bit of dignity that individual had left. It creates more deep wounds in that person's heart. It contributes to the negative thought process that they already have about themselves. It can further spiral people's substance use. You can really impact their view of the world, and you can rob them of everything that is good about them. Stigmatizing, demonizing, and criminalizing people the way we have is why we're in the position that we are. And I've never understood it because people's substance use doesn't personally impact me. I don't know why people are so angry about how this person has chose to cope, and why we haven't taken responsibility for vulnerable people. I always talk about this concept of it takes a village to raise a child, and we have lost that concept fully and completely. We're actually saying to our sickest children, you have to go out to an island on your own, and if you make it, you make it. If you don't, you don't, right? Stigma looks like people throwing garbage on our property, telling people they're going to burn people's tents down, telling people that they don't care if they die, of drug poisoning, that they're useless to our community. Stigma looks like a mother's broken heart. And it's a very dark place. And I have the privilege of people trusting me enough to sit with them in that shame and guilt. And I know better, and I have the privilege of being able to tell them that they deserve better. But it takes more than just me telling them that they deserve better. I need the person that's walking by that when they're panhandling to tell them that they deserve better. You know, and the downtown businesses that call the police when people are unwell, I need them to tell people they deserve better and that we deserve better as a community, because it's a representation of who we are. If we don't take care of our most vulnerable, then we're not doing well as a community, period. Sorry.
I agree. I think that how we treat our most vulnerable says something about us for sure. You just brought up I appreciate that you brought up things that we can do as individuals and that kind of response about how we treat people. And I wonder if you have any comments or thoughts on how we intervene into the fear. Like, I think people sometimes fear people who use substances, and I think some of that's about a lack of understanding and maybe a lack of compassion. Though I wonder if, do you have any thoughts or advice on how to shift that?
Take the time to educate yourself, you know. Take the time to volunteer places, you know. Take advantage of the fact that there's people that already have relationships with people and that they can help bridge those gaps and help create relationships with people that their behaviors and their experiences may seem very scary to us. But once you get to know that person, you find out that they have the best sense of humor and that they're brilliant, and that if you need them to help, they will help, you know, like if you need them to work, they will work. I tell people all the time, I'm like, unfortunately, because of fear and stigma, we have actually robbed ourselves of meeting some of the most brilliant, resourceful people I've ever met in my life. So I think when we educate ourselves and we obtain more knowledge, you know, about things and about people's history and things like adverse childhood experiences and stuff like that, you start to piece together why these things are the way they are, right? And I ask people that when they do educate themselves and find out that, yes, this is our responsibility as a community to take care of people. Write your local MPs. You know, if you have a voice, use your voice. If you have good connections, use your connections. And if you don't have the time to be out talking to people all day, every day, and getting to know them, you know, like I said, like people need donation. When people show up to the hub with donations, I like, if you're outside and you have the pleasure of meeting the people that are hanging around and get to obtain those donations, like you see how grateful and how thankful and how loving everybody is, and that they value you and they appreciate you. And I saw people coming on the property before that seemed very fearful. Now they're getting out of their cars and having long conversations with people and bringing meals and gift. Those things matter. And when you show up, people recognize that, right? They recognize that you showed up.
Sense of community, right?
Sense of community, sense of solidarity.
So we've talked a bit about the federal level, and we've talked a bit about the local level as everyday people. What else can be happening at the municipal level, to meet people's needs of people who use substances? I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the housing piece. Mm-hmm.
So I think that the big piece, that we're lacking, particularly with the population that I work with in this community, is actual harm reduction, supportive transitional housing for people that use substances. We have been navigating a drug poisoning crisis for almost a decade now. We know that housing people alone could contribute to their death, unfortunately. It contributes to isolation and fear and misunderstanding. And when you've had people that have been homeless for 10 years, that have been living in communal living or camping in the woods with other things, believe it or not, moving them into an apartment, it can be a massive challenge and can be a very, very scary thing. And when we house people, we're just saying, okay, here's your keys, go ahead and all will be well. And it doesn't work like that, unfortunately, right? We've seen people die alone from drug poisonings in their house. We've seen people sacrifice their housing because the isolation was so crippling. We've seen people's homes become overrun because there's so many of their peers and their friends that are homeless, and they open their door to them, and that becomes a problem in itself. What we need is housing that has overdose prevention workers on site that are there to support people if they do continue or choose to use substances. Support staff that know you're eating well every day, helping people transition back into the community, taking people to the grocery store, taking people to the movies. You know, like I have clients that haven't been to the movies since they were 5 years old, and they're in their 40s now, right? And having to go out into these social settings could be really overwhelming. But if you knew you had people to support you and had your back and helped you through all these new experiences or former experiences, the rate of success is far better, right? We see that with opiate substitution therapy. Somebody can come in and get a dose every single day, and that's all well and good. It's not very successful, but when you pair, you know, long-term counseling with opiate substitution therapy and you get to the core of why people started using, it actually is very successful, right? So we need to take these opportunities to build off of what people need and actually provide that, and we'll be successful.
Thank you, Justine. Really appreciate you coming on to the show today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today on Division Street.